G'day everyone, I'm Smokescreen and welcome back to another video. And it has been a little while, it's been a couple of weeks. I've had something go on that's taken a lot of my time, but I'm finally able to sit down and continue on with what is still round one of the Season 3 of the exhibition series currently going on in Gran Turismo 7 for the 2022 to 2023 Manufacturers Cup. But we're here at Nürburgring, which, if you have a very good memory, you'll realise in last video that we also did round 1 in. Round 1 wasn't Nürburgring GP, that's because we had a little bit of a funny thing go on. Round 1 was actually Grand Valley Highway 1, which was the brand new circuit that was added to the game just a day before that round commenced. But it turns out that Polyphony discovered that there was a massive glitch with that track and pit stops, so midway through the round, they changed the track. They changed it to this, Nürburgring GP. And so we've virtually gone in with zero practice, and normally I say, oh no, I've done no practice, but you know, maybe really I've done a little bit of practice, but seriously here, we seriously have done no practice, because we finished a Highway 1 slot, and then we had like 5 minutes to enter the next slot. When it clicked, oh my goodness, it's Nürburgring GP, oh, we haven't done any practice on this, so I've jumped in with the car I was using at Grand Valley, which is the Aston Martin DBR9 GT1 here in Group 3. We've gone in here with no practice, and it kind of dawned on me as I was doing this qualifying session, maybe the other Aston Martin choice was better, the V12 Vantage, but I didn't think quick enough to change into that car, so we're going to have to slog through this slot using the DBR9. But we'll see what we can manage to extract out of it. You can see we're 3/10 up on that qualifying lap through Sector 1. The previous lap of 53.9, about 8/10 away from the current pole position of a 53.1. So if we can just improve as the lap goes on through each little corner and each little section, maybe we can actually bring home a fairly decent qualifying spot. So we'll see how we go as we go through the bottom hairpin of Dunlop Care. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly using my terrible German enunciation. But we've lost all of our time. We're only 800ths of a second up by the time we finish that second sector. Get through Michael Schumacher S, very difficult to do flat out in this car, because this GT1 style Group 3 car is a very different machine to the modern GT3s. It's definitely geared more towards straight line speed and power tracks, whereas the Nürburgring GP here very clearly will favour a handling car. But through that third sector split, only 200ths of a second up, so it's not been a very good lap apart from the first sector. 3/10 up through the first sector, but then we've lost it all as the lap goes on. But we have the great equaliser at this track, the chicane, using the VDOL chicane layout, the very sharp, slow chicane where you can jump the curbs, and you can actually gain a lot of time through there, because not everyone's car is going to react to the curbs in the same way. Perhaps an MR car is going to jump over the curbs a lot more violently than this very stable FR car, and you can see even though we were 200ths of a second up on the previous sector split, by the time we get up to the line through the chicane, we've managed to bring home a 3/10 improvement for a 53, a 153.6 I think it was. It was good enough for 10th position by the time we actually commenced the race, up behind Grasudo, the only other Aston Martin DBR9 in this race, so I guess to beat him is probably the biggest goal here. Hopefully scrape a top 10, beat Grasudo, and probably call that a success in terms of this round, pending the number of points available. That's the other thing as well. We're all obligated to go again in this new slot, because they zeroed out all the Highway 1 points from the earlier slots in the night. So we are kind of going in fresh with no practice, but everyone's in the same boat, so it's not too bad. G's driving the Ford GT, takes a little bit of a slow line on the entry to turn 4, but you can see it works out very well for him as he gets an excellent launch out of the corner, and he's obviously, in that particular occasion, prioritising the exit speed over the entry speed, and you can see he's gone back up into 8th after having dropped down into 9th behind Grasudo, but we're still on the back bumper of our main rival here. Sauber behind is dropping away as we get a very good turn 5 and 6. Just having a slight look down the inside, hopefully to put Grasudo off. He does run a little bit wide, but gets a very good exit. And then we make a mistake and choose third gear on the exit. And very clearly, second gear in this car is the choice. So we are learning on the fly as well, having done, once again, no practice. So all of the practice is this race. But yeah, once again, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, man, I think the Vantage would be better for this. But nonetheless, Grasuito's gone 9/10 up the road. Let's see if we can set about reeling him in as we head out onto the straight. We're going to get a little bit of a slipstream as long as we get a good exit. And I think we get a fairly comparable exit to our compatriot Aston Martin driver ahead. So that gap remains fairly stagnant. Let's see who has the largest testicular region as we head into the VDOL chicane. Who can jump the curbs the fastest and the highest and the most aggressive. I think on this particular occasion, it does turn out to be Grasuito as that gap opens up by about a 10th. But there's an almighty gaggle of cars just in the lower top 10 there. Oh, Grasuito's run wide out of the final corner. That's going to give me a run down the straight here. Use a little bit of slipstream. He doesn't defend it. He knows he's made an error and just leaves the inside open for me. He doesn't bother wasting time defending. Sends me down the inside. I'm straight past Grasuito, and that's going to pay out very well in terms of my race because I'll be no longer stuck behind another car. Although, to be completely fair to him, it didn't really appear like I was stuck behind him. It was appearing that he was simply just faster than me. But we'll see if he can translate that extra little bit of pace into a return overtake and try and get back up into 9th position and hopefully claw his way back into the lower top 10 there. But as we exit out of the Mercedes arena, it doesn't look like he's able to do that. 3/10 behind now. We've got another couple of corners. Let's see what this gap does. See how it fluctuates as we head through here. Geesh, sliding all over the place in that mid-engine Ford GT, but that gap to Grasuito is opening up to beyond 6/10. So it looks at this stage perhaps I have a little bit more pace as we settled into the race. By the time we go to the end of lap 7, you can see we had a fairly consistent stint there of mainly 155s, a 156.2 on lap 4. But by the time we end lap number 7, some people are selecting this lap to be their in-lap. A lot of medium tyre runners. So this was something else because none of us had done any practice. None of us knew how long the tyres would last. And because I started deep in the field, I was put at a little bit of a disadvantage because it kind of forced my hand to start on the harder tyre. And that left me not knowing how long the soft tyres would last. So I had to kind of guess which lap to come in to ensure that when I switched onto the soft tyres, I had as little amount of race possible left such that those tyres would last to the end. So given that a lot of those medium tyre runners went in on the end of lap 7, I decided, you know what, we'll go in on one lap after just to ensure that my soft tyres are going to last. So that means we are going to go in on the end of lap 8, I think it was, commencing lap 9 now, switching over to the soft tyres, and there's Grasuito going past, so he's actually got a little bit of an undercut on me. He must have went in one lap earlier than myself on the end of lap 7, as did everybody else, and he wasn't anywhere on the totem when we went past that pit stop on the end of lap 7, so he has gained quite a couple of positions there, or a bit of time is probably be the correct terminology there. He's gained a lot of time compared to me there, performing what I assume to be an undercut. That's the only thing I can really think of for him to be able to gain that much time in one sort of pit stop phase, that he'd have to undercut. By the time we get to the end of the race, it was a pretty lonely second stint, but that just meant I was able to do some pretty consistent lap times in the 54s up until lap 15, where we've dropped into the 55s. The tyre wear starts to take hold, but we have caught up to Grasuito once again, who's caught up to the back of Umami East, driving that Porsche 911. Now that Porsche is a very different machine compared to the Aston Martin DBR. Now I'm going to bookmark that because Grasuito's got himself a half-second penalty. That means he's going to have to get an absolutely stonking final lap and make sure that he finishes at least a second ahead of me, because if he crosses the line, actually no, that's incorrect. He's going to serve that penalty on the penalty serving gate on this lap, which is on the back straight. So he's going to have to make sure he's got enough of a gap to keep that position ahead of me. But he has a bit of a struggle against his wishes of trying to do that, because the DBR9, I don't think it's the best on tyres, but at the very least it's not the best through the corners, so he is going to be struggling with trying to keep that car gripped up through the corners, and given he went in a lap ahead, one lap before me, he is going to have quite a lot of tyre wear. And I was going to touch on before that Porsche 911 is much better through the corners than the DBR9, but the DBR9 will be better on the straights. But if Grasuito is no good through the corners to the point where he's not close enough to that 911 to get any moves done down the straights, then it really doesn't matter how good down the straights he is. But he's definitely lost a lot of his tyre life at this stage. You can see we're catching up a matter of tenths in every single corner. Running into the back of him now, I guess he's got a puncture at this stage. Perhaps he went in 2 laps earlier, because this pace difference is absolutely astronomical. He gets a much better Michael Schumacher-esque. I was definitely careful of the dirty air. I didn't want to get any dirty air effects and slide wide and graze the gravel and get myself a penalty, because that'd be no good for my race too. But yeah, he's definitely lost a lot of grip on this final lap, and it's going to prove detrimental because we're only 3 tenths behind, in fact 2 tenths behind by the time he begins to serve that half-second penalty. So with that half-second penalty, he's going to brake on the straight, he's going to lose a lot of momentum, he's going to lose probably close to a second worth of time for a half-second penalty. We're not close enough to Umami at this stage, but as long as we get through the final chicane nice and smoothly, we're pretty much home and dry to bring home this 9th position, which would, you know, it would be successful in terms of the goals I set out at the start of the race, just simply trying to put in a clean... Look at that slide he had out of the final corner too, but we've put in a clean drive and beat our DBR fellow driver there and brought home 9th, but it was only because he really got a penalty. I think we probably would have struggled, or I probably would have tried to go for a move at the end of that back straight there had he not served that penalty, but it just goes to show that the undercut, it really leaves you vulnerable at the end of your stint, and that cost Grasudo quite a lot. Yes, he gained by doing the undercut, he gained a lot, but he lost out at the end of the race there. But I saw this point score, 212 for 9th position, and I'm like, well, that's no good. But as I've mentioned previously, I did have another trick up my sleeve. Thankfully, Aston Martin is a pretty good manufacturer because it has 2 fairly opposing choices for Group 3. We have this Aston Martin V12 Vantage to play with. So we're going to do another slot using the Vantage, which is pretty much polar opposite to what the DBR9 has to offer. The V12 Vantage, I would consider it to be one of the worst cars in Group 3 in a straight line. But as soon as I jumped in, I can tell you the first corner I did in this V12 Vantage, it was miles better in the corners compared to the DBR9. So we're going to go through a lap and see how we managed to get this V12 Vantage around Nürburgring GP, braking just before the 100 metre board into turn 1. Turn in, meet that apex, it dips down, it gives you a little bit of a compression to help get the corner done. Open up turn 2, slight graze of the brakes, and perhaps we could have got away without the graze of the brakes because we overslowed for turn 2, braking just before the end of the green AstroTurf on the right hand side, nice and slow towards turn 3 to open up turn 4 to punch the car out on the exit. You can use this little bit of extra tarmac from the alternate layout of the Nürburgring there, braking just on the end of the access road on the right hand side and trying to meet that apex, and just before the end of the curb on the left hand side for turn number 6. Third gear on the exit, don't graze the gravel on the exit, heading down the hill towards turn number 7, Dunlop Care. Once again, looking on the left-hand side, braking just after the start of that grey curbing and meeting that apex, a little bit of a V-shape, double apex for that corner at the bottom of the hill. Use that curb on the exit, 2 tenths up as we head through that sector split. Michael Schumacher-esque, using the extra downforce in this V12 Vantage, easily flat out, which is absolutely beautiful. And then we're going to be coming up towards turn number 10, braking just before the 100 metre board, turn in nice and early, get that curb on the inside, back on the power in third gear, over to the left hand side, and then rhythmically turn it in to turn number 11 and gets us out onto the back straight. Purple there, so our cumulative is better than what the leader has currently set there, and let's try and get a really good chicane and try and carry home this time advantage we've got. Looking on the right hand side just before the 100 metre board, turning in, try and cut these curbs as much as possible on the power. I think perhaps we ran a little tiny bit too deep there because we don't get the best of exits. Into the final corner, there's like a dry patch of grass on the left hand side, that's what we're using as our braking point. Out of the final corner, up towards the line, and it's only going to be a 53.3, only 2 tenths behind the leader, or 3 tenths behind the leader at that stage, but it was looking like we might have been on for pole position, but it wasn't quite meant to be with James Cook taking out pole position for this race. But second on the grid here, it puts us in a much better position in terms of a couple of things, because we're got to be on the better strategy. I, once again, hadn't done any practice in this car, so I wasn't sure how long the soft tyres would last, but given I can now start on the soft tyres at the start of the field, I can maximise this stint, and I don't have to guess how long they'll last, because I'll just pit in when they run out of life, and that'll leave the perfect amount of time for the medium tyre stint at the end. But on the start of this race, we got a better launch off the start compared to the McLaren 650S that James Cook has selected, but he defended off turn 1, and look at that, that gap's opened up 4 tenths of a second ahead. Now, something about James Cook, a couple of people told me that it's actually an alternate account from the EMEA region, and I think that is true because the IGTSH team I found on Twitter, and it appears to be a Hungarian Gran Turismo team, so the fact that they're racing here in Oceania under the Australian flag tells me that that's a load of BS. So he is an out-of-region player. Well, they are an out-of-region player, but nonetheless, we're going to look at it as a learning experience. I'm not going to complain too much about having a faster driver here, because at this stage, it does appear that they are indeed faster than me, as they've opened up that gap to 0.7 of a second. They also managed to get pole position over me, so that further confirms that. But let's head through this chicane. It was about 0.8 of a second gap. We get a much better chicane. I think James kind of did what we did on our qualifying lap, just going a tiny bit too deep and getting a poor exit, and we've managed to close that gap back down to about half a second as he gets a late apex and a decent exit out of this final corner, and that gap is about half a second as we finish up lap number 1. So we're still in with a shout until the end of lap number 2, when he opens up that gap to about 1.6 seconds. The gap behind still 0.8 of a second by the end of lap 3. That gap ahead to 2 seconds, gap behind 1.5. By the end of lap number 4, gap 1.6, so the leader got a slow lap there, but he's opened it back up to 2.2 by the end of lap 5, with the gap behind equalising out to about 3 seconds. By the time we skip ahead to lap number 9, which is when I was starting to consider pitting in, because have a look at that tyre wear there, pretty low on the tyre wear, and that sector split just tells the story, 1.3 seconds down. So I think it's time for our pit stop. Let's bookmark these time gaps as we head into the pits. 2.9 seconds behind the leader of James Cook, and about 5 seconds ahead of Shinya in third position. We get a pretty poor chicane, actually. The gap opens up to 3.3 and 4.9 respectively, but we're going to bring it around the inside of the final corner into the pit lane. Let's discard those soft tyres. They've done their dash, they've done their time, and let's let the Aston Martin boys slap on those medium tyres to complete the rest of this race. On the exit of the pits here, we do come across a slight bit of traffic in the form of DP Mario driving the Mercedes AMG GT. Let's see if we can get a good exit out of turn 1, but no, DP Mario manages to get the better momentum. Let's hang it around the outside, because we want to try and get this position here, because it's quite clear, DP Mario being 25 seconds behind the leader, that he's a little bit off the pace. Contact at turn 3, and I found that quite frustrating. I wasn't recording any team radio for this particular race, but it was frustrating to kind of just get bundled wide a little bit on the exit of the pits. I think I did give him a couple of flashes of the headlights just to say, look mate, it's not really making sense. I've just come out on the exit of the pits from battling in the lead. It wouldn't be rocket science just to assume that I'm a little bit faster, and perhaps DP Mario himself would lose a bit less time than he has just by letting me take the position ahead of him and utilising my slipstream a little bit. But let's see what he does. He's within his right to try and fight this position, because at this stage I was not sure what tyre DP Mario was on. Perhaps he pitted 1 lap earlier and was on brand new soft tyres. That could be a shout, in which case he would be entitled, or he would feel like it would make sense for him to be ahead of me, because much in the same vein, he wouldn't be sure what tyre I'm on. He was probably thinking, well, I'm on the mediums. If he's on the softs, he'd probably be faster, which could be the case because I am on the mediums. But he gets a really poor exit out onto the back straight, leaves us once again side by side. So we're going to have to battle this position into this VDOL chicane. Let's see what he does here. It's going to be difficult to hang it around the outside, and he backs out completely, just leaving me open to take this position. So it's a little bit frustrating that he backed out right at the end of the lap. He would have been better off backing out at the start of the lap. He goes into the pit lane. He goes into the pit lane at the end of lap. So out of all that fighting he decided to do, he was on a worn set of tyres. Whether it be soft or mediums, in any case, he hasn't pitted and he's 26 seconds off the leader. I think it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to realise that he would have just been better off letting me go ahead and just utilising the pace that I had. But that's rather frustrating, because the other two people I was battling with, James Cook and Shinya, have now also taken their pit stops 1 lap after me. And let's have a look at that gap. That gap to Shinya down to 2.9, the gap to James Cook up to 4.2. So we have lost out there. Whether that be me doing a lap on the medium tyres while they were both still left out on their soft tyres, or whether that be down to that little battle I had with DP Mario, it's a little bit frustrating nonetheless that I wasn't quite able to see if I could make an undercut work. but by the end of the race there was no further battling. You can see we had a fairly consistent medium tyre stint there, 55s and 54s. A couple of 55s at the start of the stint tells me that I left a little bit of pace on the table, because if I was setting 54s later in the stint, I should also be able to set them earlier in the stint, but it's clear that James Cook just had a little bit of extra pace that I didn't have on our medium tyres, as he's opened up that gap to over 10 seconds by the time we round the final corner to finish the race, but we were able to open that gap out to Shinya, back out to over 4 seconds. So I think in terms of that race, in terms of that pace, finishing second is exactly where we should have finished, because I don't feel like Shinya would have been able to be fast enough had he been able to stick ahead of me, and I don't feel like I would have been able to catch up to James Cook irregardless or irrespective of the battle we had against DP Mario after our pit stop. But it was a clean race, and it was a second position, and it was a fairly decent points haul of 283, so wow, I'm happy with that. It was interesting actually, because I feel like had I started off pole position and was able to stay ahead of James Cook, or started ahead of James Cook, I would have been able to stay ahead of him through that second stint, but it's clear that he was just that much better on the medium tyres, and there was no way I was going to be able to match that. And as for Shinya, he was only 4 seconds behind me, so maybe with a little bit of extra practice. Actually, he's driving the Lancer, so I don't know how good of a car the Lancer is in Group 3, so perhaps he was kind of had one hand tied behind his back by selecting that Lancer, but nonetheless I think it was a fairly good race by the top three here, and I'm fairly happy, in fact I'm very happy with 283. With the benefit of recording this a couple of weeks after I've actually done the race, I can now confirm that even though they changed the track, they still zeroed out all the points. So every single driver for round one, no matter if they did Highway 1 or if they did the Nürburgring slots, they still brought home 0 points. So even though I did enough of a drive and a good enough drive to bring home 283 there, which would be probably one of the better scores I would consider myself able to achieve in manufacturers. Even though I did a drive good enough for that, I still brought home 0 points, so thanks PD for that one. Really, really good solid round to try and debut your brand new track, but whatever, we had a good race, and I think that V12 Vantage race, it just shows the absolute duality of Aston Martin. In fact, is it the duality of AM? The duality of Aston Martin? Wow, I think that's a good title. The duality of AM. But there we go. That's going to do us for round number one. We didn't do any more slots after that, because as far as I was concerned at the time, I would have been finishing that round with 283. But the fact that we all finished with 0 meant that it was completely pointless to do any more races anyway. But nonetheless, that's going to be the end of this video today, so do hit the like button if you enjoyed, and do subscribe if you'd like to see more videos and streams from me. Do leave a comment as well, as questions, comments and constructive criticism, as always, are very much appreciated. But that's going to be the end of this one today, and that means that is it from me. So once again, I do thank you very much for watching. See you later.